The play that you're about to see is a play about twins. And twins are definitely the theme of my preamble as well. We will learn a lot about twins this afternoon. And as I've been working on this preamble, I have learned a ton about twins. For example, what is the favorite food of twins? Pears, obviously. Booze already? I'm just getting started here. As I've been working about this preamble on twins, researching, and I found this story about a single mother in Chicago who was pregnant with twins. Very difficult pregnancy, and she actually, very sad, went into a coma while she was delivering the babies. But 10 days later, she came out. She was fine, and she said, "What happened, doctor?" And the doctor said, "Well, you're the proud mother of two beautiful twins, a little boy, little girl." And she said, "That's great." And the doctor said, "You know, the only next of kin we could find was your brother, and we needed names for the birth certificate, so your brother named your children." And she said, "Oh, no, not my brother. He's such an idiot. What did he name them?" And the doctor said, "Well, he named your daughter Denise." And she said, "Oh, that's nice. What about my nephew? What about her brother?" And she said she named the boy DeNephew. No? You're not going for that? All right. I got more. I did more research on twins, and I have a friend who's the mother of twins, beautiful, again, fraternal twins, Amble and Juan. And I called her and said, "I'm doing this preamble about twins. Can we have lunch?" And we were talking about being the parents of twins. And I said, "Do you have a picture of the kids?" And she had only one picture. And I said, "That's weird. You have two kids." And she said, "You know, if you've seen one, you've seen them all." Should I keep going or move on? What do you say? One more. I saved the best for last. All right. So did you know that Napoleon was a twin? No. Yeah, Napoleon was a twin. It's a little bit of an unusual situation because he wasn't born at exactly the same time as his twin brother, because they were, in fact, born apart. Really? Groans. So I think that I have quite convincingly established at this point, with this brief survey of twin jokes stolen from the internet, that twins are funny. And that could be a decent summary of a comedy of errors. But what I hope to do over the next 25 minutes or so is to explore together how there's so much more to this play than simply the comedic pleasure of mistaking one twin for another. And let's first talk about what I like to call the play on the page. That is to say, some features of the text that you wouldn't necessarily see in a performance, and then move on to the play on the stage and explore some of the creative choices that Barbara Gaines made for this specific production. We don't know the exact date when the Comedy of Errors was written, probably sometime between 1592 and its first recorded performance in 1594. It's part of a group of early comedies and histories, including Richard III, The Taming of the Shrew, and others. This is one of two plays that Shakespeare wrote about twins. The other one is, of course, Twelfth Night. And it's worth remembering that Shakespeare and his wife, Anne Hathaway, were the parents of twins. So they had 3 kids. Their daughter Susanna was born a few months after her parents were married. And then 2 years later, in 1583, the twins Judith and Hamnet, Hamnet, Judith and Hamnet were born. And so by the time Shakespeare wrote A Comedy of Errors, he had been the father of twins for 7 or 8 years. And I think it's hard to imagine that his experience as a father of twins didn't play a role in, as he was writing the play, but also we know that Shakespeare was very environmentally friendly. He loved to recycle, right? He found his sources and recycled them. And when he was looking around for a play to revise, he chose a play from the Roman playwright Plautus called the Menechmi. These early plays, he really drew from Plautus a lot. He later moved on to other sources. But the Menechmi is a play that almost every English schoolboy was familiar with because it was taught in Latin class. And it's about two twin brothers, Menechmus of Epidamnus and Menechmus of Syracuse, who are separated at a young age. And Menechmus of Epidamnus, or the other one, misses his brother and travels to Syracuse, I think it is. I get the two cities mixed up. And he doesn't know that his brother is there. And when he gets there, the two get mistaken for each other. And Shakespeare also got an idea for adding a second set of twins from another Plotine play called the Amphitryon. So let me give you a quick summary of the beginning of A Comedy of Errors, which is very similar to the Menechmi. So at the very beginning of the play, you have these two classical cities, Syracuse and Ephesus. So that's one change Shakespeare makes that I'll talk about. He moves the other city from Epidamnum to Ephesus. Syracuse and Ephesus are in this big conflict, and any Syracusan who is discovered in Ephesus will either be executed or they have to pay a fine of 1,000 marks. And the Comedy of Errors takes place over the course of one day in Ephesus. And it begins with Aegeon, who is a Syracusan merchant, who's come to Ephesus. He's been recognized as Syracusan. He's been arrested. And he is telling his story to the Duke of Ephesus, why he is there. And he basically tells his life story, that he's a successful merchant. He and his wife were lucky enough to have twins. There was a poor woman near them who also had twins, and so he bought her twins as servants for his twins. So Aegeon and his wife Amelia, they have two twins. They're both named Antipholus. The cool kids call them the Antipholi. And then there are the two Dromios, and this family group of 6 are on a boat that smashes into a rock, and the family gets split into 2 symmetrical groups. So in one group you have Aegeon the dad with 1 Antipholus and 1 Dromio. In the second group you have Amelia the mom with 1 Antipholus and 1 Dromio. And Aegeon and his group, they make their way back to Syracuse, and they don't know what happened to the other group. And then 18 years go by, and Antipholus says, I think my brother's out there somewhere, survived the shipwreck, let's go find him. And so Aegeon says, yeah, I miss your brother too. And Dromio says, I miss my brother. And so they set out on this journey, and at one point, Aegeon gets separated. And so he's trying to make his way back to Syracuse. He's in Ephesus. He basically says to the Duke of Ephesus, just go ahead and kill me. My life is terrible. I've lost everything. I can't find anyone. And then what the audience knows and the characters don't know is that Antipholus and Dromio of Syracuse have also come to Ephesus at that same time. And the audience will soon find out, but the characters don't know, that the first Antipholus has been in Syracuse basically his whole life. He's kind of a prominent citizen. Everyone knows him. And so the play is this series of misrecognition between the 2 Antipholi and the 2 Dromios, because they don't know that the other one is there. So with that brief summary of the launch of the play, or how the play begins, setting up the conflict, let's go back to the importance of twins within the story. So we know today that if a mother has identical twins, it's because a single fertilized egg split into 2, right? And that's when they're identical. Or 2 separate eggs were fertilized by separate sperm, and that's when you have fraternal twins. It could be a boy and a girl or whatever. And do you know what doctors call twins before they're born? Womb mates. Womb mates. No, that's it. Womb mates. Now, we don't attach any moral significance to multiple births or interpret them as a sign of guilt or misbehavior on the part of the parents. But that was not the case in Shakespeare's time. In that era, when almost everything was seen as a sign of either divine approval or disapproval, unusual medical situations like multiple births were interpreted in a completely different way. There were many midwives' manuals and pamphlets that were written that said that if a mother gives birth to twins, it must be that her sexual appetite was so strong, it was so out of bounds, so outside the modest limits of order during her pregnancy that she may have had sex with multiple men as a result, and the twins may be from different fathers, especially if they were fraternal twins. Within these medical texts, there are many discussions of something called superfetation, which is when you have fetuses of different gestational ages, which is very, very rare in humans. It could happen if, for example, a woman has in vitro fertilization and doesn't know that she's also pregnant with another child, right? But in these broadsides, there was this idea that if there are twins or even much more rare multiple births, there's a problem with the parents, and these negative associations surrounding the parents extended to the twins themselves. And it's important to remember that for many, many centuries, any property a family accumulated was passed down from father to oldest son, and there was a ton of male anxiety around illegitimacy. Obviously, there was no DNA test. There was no way to know for sure if this was your child. So, all through Shakespeare, there's this fear of being cuckolded. And when you think about twins, about this theoretical possibility of superfetation and the rampant anxiety about legitimate paternity, you can see how having twins then was much more fraught than it is now. Scholar Daisy Murray discusses the monstrous potential of the twin relationship in the plays of the time, and how Shakespeare, in Comedy of Errors, includes those associations in order to reject this depiction of twinship. She argues that, quote, Shakespeare answers the cultural conception of twins as monstrous and unnatural with an alternative depiction that instead positions the twin relationship as desirable and beneficial. So think about this as you watch. Does Shakespeare portray the Antipholoi and the Dromio in a positive light? And for the comedy to work, they need to get frustrated. There needs to be some conflict. They get into problems. But pay attention especially to the ending and ask yourself, what impression of twins does Shakespeare leave the audience with? So it's fascinating how in this comedy about twins, twinning, and doubling are woven into the fabric of the play in almost every level. And in the Menechmi, there are 17 instances of mistaking one twin for the other. And in the Comedy of Errors, because Shakespeare really kind of put his foot on the gas for this, that number grows to 50. In her essay, The Girls from Ephesus, Oxford professor Laurie McGuire explores an extraordinary number of examples in the play of duality, antithesis, symbiosis, fusion, and binary opposition. Let me read that list again. Duality, antithesis, symbiosis, fusion, and binary opposition. So each one of those has to do with a doubling or two in one. And examples include how Shakespeare combines Pauline and Plotine sources, mixing one of antiquity's most spiritual writers, St. Paul, with one of its most salacious, Plotine. He gives us two kinds of supernatural power: the prestidigitory exorcisms of Dr. Pinch. Prestidigitory just means basically hand tricks. So, Antipholus of Syracuse, everyone, he's sort of trying to hide out in Ephesus. He doesn't want to be recognized, and everyone not only recognizes him, but they call him by name, and he begins to think like this is some alternative magic world. It's haunted, something's going on. And at one point, this character, Dr. Pinch, is called to do an exorcism, and he's all flashy. So you have these two kinds of supernatural powers. the prestidigitory exorcisms of Dr. Pinch, and the holistic religion of the abbess. Maguire points out that the lodgings in the play are characterized by division and duality. The centaur, which is half man, half horse, and the phoenix, which is death and rebirth. This doubling, this emphasis on paradox, pairs, and pairing also describes the themes of the play, which critic Richard Henze identifies as finding oneself by losing oneself and the freeing of oneself by binding oneself. So these paradoxes run through everything. The doubling, the emphasis on paradox, pairs, and pairing describes the language of the play, which is filled with an unusually large number of puns and paradoxes, even for Shakespeare, and that is saying a lot, right? The paradoxes start early in Act 1, Scene 1, when Aegeon, the merchant from Syracuse and father of the Antiphili, says that he will speak griefs unspeakable. He describes his wife's pregnancy as pleasing punishment. When he tells how the shipwreck split his family into two symmetrical groups, he says that he and his wife each had what to delight in and what to sorrow for. Later, Antipholus of Syracuse talks about his sure uncertainty. Poet Eamon Grennan points out that the profusion of paradoxes and puns, which many critics have traditionally seen as a young, immature Shakespeare who has found this new toy, this incredible facility with language, and he just can't help himself. He's tossing out all this playful language. Grennan says, no, these echo the play's theme of twins, twinning, two meanings in one, right up to the point in Act 5 when everyone's true identity is revealed, everyone recognizes everyone else, and then all the puns and paradoxes disappear. Unlike the play that preceded it, the language in the last scenes has what Grennan calls a happy singularity. So all of this twinning, these paradoxes, these examples of fusion and binary relationships relate to and reinforce a subplot and a theme of the play, which is marriage. And I mentioned that when Shakespeare recycles the Menechmi, instead of it being set in Syracuse and Epidamnum, he moves it from Syracuse to Ephesus, in part because Ephesus had this reputation as being a place that was filled with kind of dark magic and people that would trick you, but also because of the book of Ephesus in the New Testament. It's hard for us to understand, I think, in 2023, how well everyone in Shakespeare's day knew the Bible. Everyone went to church every week, and even if you couldn't read, the Bible was read to you. If you could read, you read it all the time, and Shakespeare knew the Bible incredibly well. And so by moving it to Ephesus, he automatically brings this whole association with one of the most famous aspects of the book of Ephesus, which is Paul's advice on marriage in Ephesus chapter 5, beginning in verse 22. Wives, submit yourself unto your husbands as unto the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church. And then culminating in verse 31, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. So the play's prominent two-in-one motif echoes this advice from Paul to the Ephesians, and in how two can become one in the mystical, physical combining of man and woman into husband and wife. And you'll definitely hear some of those echoes as Adriana, wife of Antipholus of Ephesus, and her sister Luciana discuss marriage in Act 2, and also as the confusion between the Antiphili tests Adriana's marriage. Right, so Adriana is married to Antipholus of Ephesus, and then when she sees the twin and doesn't know who it is, it's Antipholus of Syracuse, and says, honey, come home for lunch. And he's like, who are you? I don't know who you are. And so the Antiphili create problems for their marriage. this is a good place to make a transition from the play on the page to the play on the stage. This production has a new frame for the story, what the program calls studio scenes. And in this new frame, set at an English movie studio in the 1940s and World War II, a group of actors who worked together previously on a very successful pirate movie, they're making a movie version of A Comedy of Errors in order to cheer up the troops. And so there's The Comedy of Errors, and then for this production, this story has been written around that. And the doubling, the twinning, the twins, the pairs that are so deeply woven into the fabric of the written text also appear in the frame as well. All of the actors play at least two parts, one within the frame, where they are movie actors on a film, and then one in The Comedy of Errors, the film that they're making. This doubling creates comic opportunities that the studio scenes exploit to full advantage. Look, for example, at the characters of Lord Brian Halifax, who plays Dromio of Ephesus within the movie, both played by Chicago Shakespeare Theater veteran Kevin Goodall. Lord Halifax's character is convinced that he is far above the role of Dromio the servant, and his attempts to elevate that character and to get more screen time for himself are hilarious. Marriage is another theme of the frame that echoes the themes of The Comedy of Errors. In the studio scenes, veteran actor Ross Lehman plays Dudley Marsh, an actor and director of the fictional film, as well as Dromio of Syracuse in the film. And in the frame, he and his wife, Veronica Marsh, played by Susan Moniz, are having some marital issues. And it's a lot of fun to watch how her desires and interactions within the studio scenes, within the frame, echo her scenes as she plays Adriana within the play. Ron West wrote the studio scenes, and he is an accomplished actor, writer, producer. He's a fixture at Second City Comedy Troupe here in Chicago, and he's written or contributed to many other plays that you might have seen here, an earlier production of The Taming of the Shrew. And he also wrote a play called The People versus Friar Lawrence, the man who killed Romeo and Juliet, about which the Chicago Reader wrote, "This bawdy, B-A-W-D-Y, revisionist take on Romeo and Juliet, in which bit player Friar Lawrence gets framed for the murders of every Capulet and Montague in Verona, offers a master class on satire." And you'll definitely see West's satirical skills on full display this afternoon. My preamble is all about twins. I wish I had another twin joke here, but I don't. And the production is a kind of twin because it's a reimagining of an earlier production of The Comedy of Errors with this same frame written by Ron West. He revised it for this production. But this earlier production was produced here. Barbara Gaines directed it back in 2008. And Ron West has an extensive resume acting on stage, on screen. He's been in a number of movies, Backdraft. He was in episodes of Seinfeld, Third Rock from the Sun, The King of Queens, Law and Order, among many others. He has a deep knowledge about actors, acting, directors, show business, and he clearly loves Shakespeare and has an extensive knowledge of the play. As you watch the show this afternoon, you'll drink from that deep knowledge of show business and be on the lookout for allusions and references to other plays by Shakespeare. Some are very obvious and some are a little more subtle. And I love how on West's bio on the Second City website, it says that he bats right and throws right. So if you have a softball team and you're looking for a great comedic writer who bats right and throws right, Ron West, keep him in mind. He imagined this frame, he set this movie version of The Comedy of Errors at Shepperton Studios, which is an actual studio in England where many famous films have been made. The Third Man, Dr. Strangelove, the music Oliver, Franco Zeffirelli's Hamlet. Shakespeare in Love, among many others, and movies and TV shows are still being made there. And so if a movie version of A Comedy of Errors had been made during World War II, it could very well have been made at Shepperton Studios. And in the production, you'll see this afternoon, the movie that they're making gets interrupted several times because it says they're being bombed. And that detail is based on the fact that Shepperton Studios is just down the road from the Vickers Armstrong aircraft factory, which was bombed numerous times by the Germans. Those bombings did disrupt filming during the Second World War. And as you watch the studio scenes, look for the way that West weaves this historical detail into the subplot involving the significant ego of one of the characters. The doubling, the twins, the twinning that I identified as such a prominent feature of the written text also appears on the stage, albeit in different ways. So James Noon is the set designer or scenic designer for this production, and if I've counted correctly, the show that you're about to see is the 10th set that he has designed for this theater, as well as 17 productions on Broadway and many more in opera houses and theaters around the world. He and Barbara Gaines have worked together many, many times, and when you see the set, you'll see why she asked him to design her final production. The set embodies the doubling and the paradoxes that I talked about earlier. It's a play set of a movie set of a play set. So it's like a Shakespearean character where you have a boy acting, pretending to be a girl who's pretending to be a boy, and the set and the props, along with the costumes by Mika Vanderploeg and the lighting design by Ken Posner, who's lighting his 4th production with Barbara Gaines, definitely embody the farcical, fun tone of the play and work together with the performances of these veteran actors to really bring it to vivid life. One piece of this set that caught my attention is the temple into which Antipholus and Dromio of Syracuse will seek sanctuary in Act 5. Right? They're there. They don't know why everyone knows them. They're convinced that Ephesus is this crazy place, and they kind of need to get out of town in a way, so they go into this temple. And in the text, the building that they go into where the abbess lives is called the Priory, which makes sense because a priory is a monastery where monks and nuns live. But the building you'll see the abbess grandly enter and exit from is a Greek temple, not a typical monastery. And this is because set designer Noon is reaching back through the movie set and through the play to ancient Ephesus, where the Temple of Artemis was one of the most important buildings, a magnificent building that for hundreds of years was regarded as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And notice how Noon presents the temple as already very old, suggesting both its history as the Temple of Artemis, who is the Greek goddess of, among other things, childbirth, children, and chastity. And she's the Roman goddess Diana, is another way to recognize her. I love the way that these two histories, these two goddesses, Artemis and the abbess, play off each other, just like so many other paradoxes and binary relationships within the text of the play. And if Noon had portrayed the building as more monastery, less classical temple, he would have lost that delicious doubling that characterizes so much of the text. I mentioned, I think earlier, that this is the final production that Barbara Gaines, our founding artistic director, will direct before she retires at the end of the season. But, you know, this is the end of the season. This is when this run is over, she'll retire. And over her more than 3 decades with Chicago Shakespeare Theater, she's directed 60 productions, almost all of Shakespeare's 37 plays, several of them multiple times, and 6 world premieres. I think it's interesting that as she looked back over that career, and she really is in a very small group of people, and it's just a group of people that basically founded Shakespeare companies and stayed with them for 30 years, who have directed so many plays. and that she chose to end her career with this play, not just with Comedy of Errors, but with this reimagining of the Comedy of Errors with these studio scenes frame from 2008. And as you watch, you can really see and feel her affection for the play and for her seasoned team of actors, 3 of which are reprising roles from the 2008 production: Ross Lehman as Dudley Marsh, or Dromio of Syracuse, William Dick as Charles Chittick, second merchant, and Kevin Goodall as Lord Brian Halifax, Dromio of Ephesus. And I think it's also significant that as Barbara, ends her career, rather than doing this, maybe like a soul-crushing King Lear or whatever, she said, I'm going to have just a lot of fun. It's super playful and fun. It's just a riot. And so she's really going out on that note. And one of the ways that you'll see Gaines' incredibly deep experience directing Shakespeare in this production is her willingness to edit the original work to create the exact interpretation of the play that she wants for this production. And I've heard Barbara joke that she is the butcher of Navy Pier for her willingness to really go and edit Shakespeare. And less experienced directors sometimes treat Shakespeare's original text as a kind of secular scripture that every word must be respected. And Gaines is so comfortable with the play that she and Ron West, really collaborating with Shakespeare, have created a new production, which is really an original work of art in its own right. And ironically, her willingness to cut enough from the original text to make space for these studio scenes may bring your experience with the play closer in some ways to what an audience in Shakespeare's day would have experienced. So we know that there was music in Shakespeare's play, and we have some of the lyrics, which are sometimes part of the text of the play itself, but we have none of the music. We don't know what any of the music was. And for this production, Barbara and Ron West worked with sound designer and composer Lindsay Jones, who's working on his 33rd production here. And together, they selected the songs that you will hear in the studio scenes. They're all from the 1940s. They were all very popular in the UK at that time. Music director Joe Kanosian helped with the arrangements and with coaching the actors in rehearsal. And I love how the addition of this music adds a lot of fun and energy to the production and also brings it back, as I said, closer to what the original experience of a Shakespeare's play would have been. Let me close by returning to one more example of the twins, the twinning, the paradoxes, the duality that characterize this play and this production. You'll see in the theater and in the program, there's a kind of open letter from Barbara to all of us where she reflects on her 37 years as the director of Chicago Shakespeare. And she talks about how in 1986, they went on the roof of the Red Lion Inn in Lincoln Park, and they had a production of Henry V. And the actor that she cast was Bruce A. Young, and now, 37 years later, she's reimagining this adaptation of Comedy of Errors, and she cast that same actor, Bruce A. Young, as the Duke of Ephesus. It's really quite astonishing to think of all the incredible theater she's created and shaped, all the acting careers that she started and nurtured, all of the people she's collaborated with, between that pair of performances directed by Gaines and delivered by Young, to think of all the ways she's challenged and delighted so many audiences over the course of this incredible career. Thank you so much, and enjoy the play.